Hello and welcome to this video on displaying your bonsai tree on a stand. While exhibiting a bonsai tree, you may simply place your bonsai on the table. In other cases, you might also have to use a low stand, as some trees will need a tall stand. The differences in choice are driven by several factors. This video will provide some direction and clarification to the stands in use when exhibiting bonsai and why you might choose one, the other, or none at all. To start this explanation, you need to consider the bonsai you're trying to display. Species, style, size, environment, and more are all factors that you must weigh in your decision-making process. Some things need more consideration than others, but overall, everything should at least be looked at, if only briefly. Some species, such as an accent plant in the form of moss, do not necessarily need a stand. They may benefit from it, but it's not necessary. In comparison, a very colourful and notable floral display would also need a less of a stand, although this is a somewhat if but maybe when or how kind of statement. Then you have a strong-looking oak bonsai. Again, this might not need a stand, while a more feminine or delicate oak might benefit from it. A formal upright may benefit from a stand, but not something like a root over rock. A small bonsai, by itself, does not benefit much from a stand, as there's already not much of a bonsai to start with, so the display really doesn't get improved by its presence. But when you want to display several small bonsai together, it can be a very useful tool, as it keeps them all interconnected and related in a way, so when you're looking at them as a collection, they do resemble just that, a collection, not a series of individual bonsai assembled together rather vaguely. Larger bonsai are considerably more varied. For example, a single large bonsai may not really benefit from a stand. This is because it does not really need anything added to it to improve its impact. Then you have very large bonsai, and a stand can be useful for these. Partly because it gives you a platform on which you can rotate the bonsai. This makes it much easier to present the front of your bonsai to the viewers, rather than trying to wrestle with a very large bonsai in a very large pot. It also acts as a sort of balance point between the table or bench and the bonsai pot itself leading into the bonsai. There isn't the sharp and unpleasant change. The bonsai pot is also a factor you should consider. A stone slab, a coloured enamel or lacquer, oval shape, squared, and so on. Each of these pot characteristics will affect the kind of stand you want to consider. Arguably, a tall pot needs a modestly to extremely tall stand depending on what you're trying to show off. You may also want to consider whether or not it's going to be a solid slab of wood or metal or something else, or more delicate in its appearance. A low pot may not benefit unless it is incredibly wide. That is, a shallow and wide pot would benefit from a stand that is a little wider than the pot itself, adding some depth or height to the surface area that you have the bonsai on without actually changing the pot size itself. You must also consider the environment in which you are displaying your tree. A plain white background is completely neutral, and a stand is only useful if you want to accentuate the bonsai in this environment. In other circumstances where you have a busy background, it would detract from the bonsai, so a stand might be useful to draw the audience's attention. A printed screen would be the opposite, where it's intended to be a relatively low-key background that doesn't really detract from the bonsai, but it doesn't add anything either, meaning a stand may be useful, or you might find that it doesn't actually have any real benefit. And now that we've confused you with this range of if, buts, and maybes, let's look at the kind of pots and stand briefly, as it may make more sense after that. There are a relatively small number of pot types: round, square, rectangle, rounded, oval, lotus shape, and wide shallow pots. This covers the vast majority of what you're going to have to deal with. Amongst these, the only variability is going to be the height and width. With that in mind, you can pretty much figure out everything from those three key criteria: its shape, its height, and its width or depth. From this, you then need to look at what you're going to be putting it on, the stand itself. Fortunately, most stands fall into one of a few different styles, and this makes it a bit easier. You have the traditional style, and this largely reflects Japanese aesthetics and cultural background of bonsai. They're generally made from wood and occasionally stone, and intended to effectively complement the natural beauty or the natural aesthetic elements of the bonsai itself. Because of this, they are generally kept as simple and unobtrusive as possible, and trying to force focus onto the bonsai itself while having a very simple, if not minimalistic, appearance. The most popular style, let's say, is basically a piece of wood that is carved to fit the tree, or more accurately the pot, perfectly. And these are generally there to just hold the tree in place and give it that little bit more taste and take it out of just being a pot. And then you have the modern style. The modern style varies considerably more, and this is because they're really not so simplistic. One of the more ridiculous but often chosen options is the floating or levitating bonsai. These just use magnets to hold them up in place. They do create a very attractive visual effect, but if you are, let's say, more of a traditionalist, these can be something of a annoyance, let's say. Another option is also the minimalist bonsai stand, and these are fundamentally very much like the, well, let's call it traditional style, but rather than being made out of natural materials, they're generally made out of synthetic materials, and they're nearly always just a single colour. So think of a wood block painted white. That's basically what this is. You also have what could be described as hybrids of these. Basically a combination of modern and traditional designs, and, well, yeah, that speaks enough to itself. It's going to be a mix-up of what you want, really. In terms of the stand structure itself, the traditional wooden stand is relatively straightforward, and again, they are generally going to be, well, made out of wood, although often specifically cedar or pine, although depending on where you are, the exact choice of wood may vary. The actual appearance will vary considerably, though, in terms of the wood used, some being just looking very natural, and others looking very rustic. It depends on the species of bonsai you're growing. They come in all kinds of sizes and shapes, though, so there's no one traditional style as such. There are metal display stands available, and these are generally very, well, to be quite blunt about it, crude if not rough looking, and made out of stainless steel, wrought iron, and similar. They are intended to be almost industrial in their nature. There are the aforementioned rotating or turntable stands. These are ones that we do promote the use of for large bonsai, simply because it's a lot easier to move than trying to move a large and heavy bonsai around. It saves your back, your arms, and any other injuries that might come about from it, and the name is relatively self-explanatory. Then there are display slabs, and these are exactly what the name says. They're a flat piece of stone or wood, and they are useful if you want something very sturdy and solid, and you can make them to fit just about anything, which is even better. Finally, there are hanging display stands, and these, again, are very similar to the others, except they're meant to give the illusion that your trees are floating. They can be useful if you're trying to display them in a more artistic environment. Having been through all of this, you can see the variety of stands available, and the sort of pots you would be planting your bonsai in, and a variety of species. If we take the pots and stands described, we can now look at mixing and matching the bonsai pot, and stand all together. While the graphic you see now is not perfect, it does show an idea as to how you can choose a pot, stand, and bonsai. We take each of the three sets of criteria and try to match it. Each square is a pair of variables. For example, pot shape and a species, or species and stand. Then the fourth is the combination of these. It shows you what is arguably a idealistic solution, even if it's not the perfect solution for what you want, as you may find that the end result just doesn't appeal to you. That is why by no means is anything we've given you prescriptive, but an indication of what you might want to consider and how. On top of what we mentioned so far, we do suggest that you use a pot with feet when you have a stand. The reason for this is that we find it not only more appealing, but that is an entirely personal aesthetic value. The second reason is more important. A flat-bottomed pot will have water accrue underneath it. This is a problem, as it will lead to, in the worst case scenario, the wood rotting, or water stains on your wood stand. Now, if you're not using wood, you have other options, particularly if we're talking about a synthetic like plastic. But if we're talking about, say, metal, where you could start developing rust, or if it's stone, where you could get marks on the stone for that reason, this is an important thing to consider. We say that with one exception, and that is the square pot. We find that at everything, despite how strange it may seem, a square pot, despite having a flat base, looks better on a stand. But again, your aesthetics may be different, so you may not find this visually appealing. This should give you a place to start looking at how to use bonsai stands to better display your bonsai trees, and hopefully some idea as to which of these things will be useful and which won't. After all, it's going to be up to you to choose what you like seeing. It's your bonsai. We're not telling you how or what to do anything. Just here's the information. Use it if you find it helpful. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.